Good afternoon and welcome to the Narrow Path radio broadcast. My name is Steve Gregg and we're live for an hour each weekday afternoon, taking your phone calls if you have questions about the Bible or the Christian faith or a difference of opinion from the host, or maybe you find Christianity and the Bible altogether unacceptable and you have reasons for rejecting it. I'd be very happy to talk with you if you want to talk with me about that. The number to call to get on the air is 844-484-5737. And right now we do have a couple of lines open still. They are filling up, but if you call later, they may be full. But call now, and you can get through at 844-484-5737. Our first caller today is David, calling from Camarillo, California. David, welcome to the Narrow Path. Thanks for calling.
You're welcome. Steve, I wanted to preface my question by a few comments regarding Scripture in the Bible. I've heard you say on more than one occasion that we're going to come with Jesus in the clouds and re-energize our bodies, and then our bodies are going to be taken up out of the grave, and we're going to go off with Jesus. But my question is this: there's so many scriptures like Ecclesiastes 9:5 and 6, Psalms 146:4, Psalm 143:4, I think it is. There's so many, Job 14, Job 19:25 to 27. There's so many scriptures that say that when we die, we actually just go and rest in the tomb until the day of resurrection. But I don't see where it says in the scripture that we're going to come back and re-energize our bodies. I think it's pretty clear, especially in Job 14.
Read it.
Anyway.
Read what you're talking about. Read Job 14.
Well, I'm talking about the whole
the whole chapter? Okay.
Yes.
Well, okay, you say you don't know where it says in the Bible, and yet everything you've referred to is in the Old Testament. Of course, everything I would refer to on this subject.
Well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. There's plenty of spots in the New Testament, too.
Okay.
1 Corinthians 15, 20 to 24. There's 1 Corinthians 15, 50 to 55. There's,
I'm going to have to ask you to read some of those verses so that we'll know what you're referring to, because I'm familiar with that chapter, and I don't know of anything in that chapter that would support what you're suggesting. But go ahead and read the verses that you think are relevant.
Well, hang on just a second. I'm driving.
Okay. Well, then let me just jump in here.
I mean, you've got your keyboard. You can pull up these verses and read them just as fast as I can look them up.
Well, I don't look up things on things on the computer while I'm on the air. I actually just turn in my Bible, but I can't turn to those passages as quickly as you're giving them. But I am familiar with almost all of the ones you mentioned, especially the first ones you mentioned, because they're commonly brought up on this topic. And I did, of course, I'm very familiar with 1 Corinthians 15. But but there are quite a few places in the Old Testament that give the impression that people in the Old Testament did not know about any life after this life. Some think that Job predicted a resurrection because he said that in his flesh he will see God, even though his flesh is eaten by worms. That sounds like he's saying after he's died, he'll rise again, even after he's been eaten by worms and so forth. That is a possible meaning. That is a possible meaning.
But in Job 14, he specifically says that the Lord will call, and I will answer, and he'll be raised.
Well, give me the verse you're talking about there.
Well, hang on just a second. Let me pull it up real quick, if you don't mind me looking.
Well, not while you're driving. Well, let me put it this way.
I'm not driving. I'm parked now. So
okay.
we're
well, let me put things in perspective.
But he says
Excuse me, I'm going to have to ask you to let me speak for a moment because I do have some right to speak a few words, at least on my own show here. I wanted to let you know that the passages you've mentioned are Old Testament passages, with the exception of 1 Corinthians 15, which doesn't say anything to your purpose. But the Old Testament does not reveal the state of spirits in the human body or out of the human body at the point of death. Immortality is not really a discussion of the Old Testament. It's an amazing thing, really, that God expected people to love him and serve him without making any specific promises about rewards in the next life. There are some statements, as I said, in Job and in some of the Psalms, and certainly there's one in Daniel chapter 12 that many people have understood to be references to a future resurrection, which, of course, the New Testament also describes a future resurrection. Jesus did, Paul did, Revelation does. So we all agree there's a resurrection if we're following the Bible, whether we're looking at the Old or the New Testament. But I don't know of any Old Testament passage that speaks of consciousness beyond the grave prior to the resurrection. Of course, the resurrection doesn't occur until the end of the age. But we die before then. At least most of us will. Most Christians have. And the question you're talking about, I think, is about what we call the intermediate state, where what is the condition of the believer who has died and has not yet been raised from the dead. It sounds to me like you're quite a believer in the resurrection of the dead, as I am. So we don't have to bicker over that. And that sounds like what we're doing. We're concerned at this point, what you're saying you can't find any evidence for in the Old Testament is that the spirit leaves the body, goes to be with the Lord, and then comes back to rejoin the body at the time of the resurrection. That seems to be the one thing that you're not accepting. Well, I will agree that the New Testament, or the Old Testament, doesn't say a word about it, for or against it. Okay, except you did bring up Ecclesiastes 9, where Solomon said the dead know nothing at all. And this is, and one of the Psalms that says that in the day they perish, in the day they die, their thoughts perish or their plans perish. The latter statement, of course, simply means that their plans come to nothing. But in Ecclesiastes, Solomon does seem to say that a person who is dead is no more conscious than an animal who is dead. And that's, of course, in Ecclesiastes 9:5. But Solomon is not telling us anything he knows about. He doesn't know what happens to people when they die. He's received no revelation about it. This book is not a book that was like revealed to him. He's writing a book about his search for meaning away from God. One can see that just by reading through Ecclesiastes. He's talking about how he was away from God. He was not considering God. He was looking for the ultimate purpose of life under the sun. And this under the sun phrase is used, over a dozen times in the book. And he's basically saying that when he fell away from God, and we have record of that in 2 Kings of Solomon falling away from his faith in God. When he was away from God and seeking for meaning away from God, he tried many things, he said, to find satisfaction and meaning. He goes through a list of things. He tried music, he tried alcohol, he tried a lot of women, he tried partying in general, he tried philosophy, he tried horticulture, he tried money, he had it all, and he could try all those things. He was looking for meaning in the things that exist under the sun, obviously excluding God, who is not under the sun. And therefore, what he concludes again and again throughout the book is that everything he tried was emptiness. He says it was like striving after the wind. It was like it was all emptiness. He uses that word a bunch of times throughout the book. Almost everything he tried, he says, I found that too was emptiness, or vanity is the older English word for it. The Hebrew word means emptiness. So he's giving his testimony about how he was thinking and what he was, where his search took him when he was away from God. Now, the last verses in the book give the impression that he has come back to God. And perhaps that's why he wrote the book. Having come back to God, he's written the book as a warning to people who might look for meaning in all the places he looked. He says, hey, I've been there, I've done that. Don't trust it. There's nothing there. Now, in the course of that, he talks about some of the things that he mused, some of the things he thought about when he was away from God. In fact, the chapter that has the line in it, "The dead know nothing at all," which is Ecclesiastes 9, the chapter begins with these words, "For I considered all this in my heart." Considered, past tense. He's telling his testimony. It's like if you heard a Christian give his testimony, say, before I found Christ, I tried a lot of different philosophies. I thought there was reincarnation. I thought it's karma that determines everything. A person, gives their testimony that way. They tell about what they used to think and what they tried, and the whole book is basically his testimony, his confession of the false trails he went on, including false philosophy. And during that time, one of the things he thought and one of the things he considered was that the dead don't know anything at all. He does not affirm that, certainly. In fact, he seems to deny it when he says at the very end of the book, "Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether it is good or whether it is evil." So he sees there, at the time he's writing, he informs his reader that there is a judgment, there is a life beyond this, but in the course of writing the book, he sometimes says it's no different for an animal than for a man who dies, and so forth. Now, Solomon, when he was reasoning that way, as he tells us, he was away from God. He's not telling us things that were revealed to him by God. He's telling us things that he considered. So, to take that as for example, making that, trump something that Jesus or Paul said, or John in the Revelation, who saw the spirits of the deceased up in heaven in Revelation chapter 6 and in Revelation chapter 20. I don't think Solomon, in his speculations, which is what he represents those to be, I don't think that he's got more authority to speak than Jesus, who said, "I am the resurrection of the life. He that believes in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. Whoever lives," that's you and me, "and believes in me shall never die." He also said that. He says that we have already passed from death unto life in John 5:24. Paul talks about when we die, we are absent from our body, but present with the Lord. In fact, when he contemplates his own death in Philippians chapter 1, he says, "I'm eager," because he's in prison and suffering. He says, "I'm eager to depart and to be with Christ." He's talking about dying. He contemplates death to be his departure, to be with Christ. So when John sees the souls of the martyrs up in heaven, waiting for the judgment, waiting for the resurrection, when Paul talks about being absent from the body, is present with the Lord, and wanting to depart this life to go be with the Lord, when Jesus said that those who believe in him will never die and have already eternal life, it's hard to know how one can fit in a doctrine of being really non-existent or unconscious or not alive in the intermediary state. But honestly, if you're convinced that that is what the Bible teaches, then feel free to believe it, because nobody is going to go to heaven or hell or be saved or on good terms with God because they had the right view of that particular point. That's just an area of disagreement, which doesn't have any bearing on your standing with God. So if you don't find what I say convincing, I certainly don't find what you're sharing convincing, but so what? We don't have to agree, do we? I don't think we do. I appreciate your call. I've got my lines full, and we do need to move along. So let's talk to Matthew from Everett, Washington. Matthew, welcome to The Narrow Path. Thanks for calling.
Hi, Steve. I actually commented last night on the Facebook page, Narrow Path, about my daughter's school teaching them yoga.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you recall that.
Right, I did read that.
Yeah, I never read your thoughts, so I was wondering what you think about it.
Well, I haven't had time to reply, but and sometimes I don't. But
I got you.
Yeah. I don't think that I don't think that schools should teach religion. Now, I realize that yoga is regarded to be a health-related practice. Yeah, so was transcendental meditation. When TM was being introduced to public schools, it's a relaxation technique. Right, it's Hinduism. It's you chant praises to a guru, and you offer. If you're going to practice TM, you're supposed to bring a fruit basket to a picture of Guru Dev. I mean, if that isn't idolatry, if that isn't religion, I'm not sure what is. And yoga, although yoga does, and you can practice the moves and the stretches and the positions in yoga without tapping in, I think, to the spiritual roots of the whole teaching and of the whole practice. And therefore, I think there are people who do yoga stretches who are not necessarily compromising themselves in the area of idolatry. There aren't very many people who teach yoga who leave out the spiritual aspects. And I would not wish for my children to be in a school where they're teaching yoga, because it's almost always taught along with the whole idea of chakras and other
Right.
Hindu ideas. So, I think keeping your children out of the yoga class is a very safe thing to do on their behalf.
Yeah. No, they. My daughter is a very spiritual kid, and she's always. I've taught her, about Abraham and all the fathers, and I ask her every day, how many gods are there? And she goes, there's one God, and the Son. And I said, very good. And then because I came home yesterday and she was showing me that, she said namaste like it was like a prayer. I was like, what?
Mm-hmm,
So I was really shocked by that.
So have you talked to the school about this?
I have, and they've actually been very cooperative, and they said we're allowed to pick her up a little bit earlier. So me and her mother are talking about it.
Yeah, I think
But
it'd be a good thing.
It's really shocking. It's really shocking that they didn't even mention it to me. I found out because my daughter told me this stuff.
Oh yeah, they don't inform parents when they're going to do that kind of stuff.
But yeah, I've been doing a lot of looking around and reading all day long, and I've been seeing a lot of stuff. It's very, very deeply rooted in Hindu stuff and Shiva and all that kind of stuff. And
it's interesting
no
that
bueno.
anything that's remotely Christian will be rooted out of the public schools by the ACLU, very quickly. But if you teach children how to practice Islam, if you teach them, and this has happened in public schools, or as you said, Hinduism in yoga and so forth, somehow this isn't regarded as the same kind of violation of the Constitution,
Right.
as teaching Christianity would be. So I mean, it's obvious that Christianity is the only religion that's singled out for persecution and for rejection. If school, I don't think the Constitution requires religion to be left out of schools. I wouldn't mind if my children were in a comparative religion class. Of course, all my kids were homeschooled, but I don't have any problem with my children being exposed to other religions. But I wouldn't consider it fair if other religions are able to give their pitch and children are encouraged to practice some of the rituals of those religions in the schoolroom, and yet Christianity, my own faith, is deliberately left out. That's simply the hypocrisy.
One more thing that kind of came to mind was I know Hinduism is extremely old. Like, isn't it like 5,000 years old?
Very old, yeah. It's older than
like
Christianity.
So it makes me wonder. I wonder if those are the types of things that God was warning, Moses about and stuff.
Hinduism, what God was warning Moses about was the Canaanite religions in the Middle East, whereas Hinduism was further east than that in India and so forth. But it was contemporary. But what they did have in common, and all religions did in the time of Moses, except for Judaism, which he served to establish, all religions worshipped many gods. The Canaanites did, of course, the Greeks did, the Romans did, the people of India did. Hinduism postulates that there are millions of gods. The uniqueness of the Jewish faith when it arose was its monotheism, its belief in only one God. So God was very jealous over that. He says, "Listen, don't you ever worship any other gods? They're all demons." So that, although Moses and the people of Israel were confronted with Middle Eastern pagan gods and religions, they were not in India at the time. But when the Apostle Thomas went to India, he certainly confronted the Hindu faith with the gospel too.
Yeah. One more comment I have, and I'll let you go. But it made me think of, I read C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters a while ago, and that experience kind of made me think of that. It made me think of, Uncle Screwtape explained to his nephew this is how you should do it, very sneaky, and don't let them know what's going on. And that, well, my own daughter, who who came to me telling me that kind of stuff, like in a funny sense, that made me think of Uncle Screwtape in that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, how old is your daughter?
I'm sorry if nobody else has read that book, but
how old is your daughter? 6 years old. Okay, and is this your oldest daughter?
Yes.
Yeah. So you're just dipping your toe into the experience of having a child in public school. I raised 5 kids, and of course I myself went through public school, so I'm not ignorant. In fact, it doesn't surprise me even a little bit that they're introducing what really amounts to information that's contrary to your faith, and they won't let you know about it. But it's interesting that they're cooperating with you when you confront them. Perhaps they don't want a lawsuit, but lots of the schools wouldn't care what the parents think. Listen, I don't have much time, but I have a lot of people waiting.
Thank you so much.
All right, Matthew, thanks for your call. All right, let's talk to Andrew from Portland, Oregon. Andrew, welcome to the Narrow Path.
Hey, Steve, how you doing?
I'm well. Thank you.
It's good to talk to you. I met you when you were in Shed, Oregon, earlier this year.
Great.
It was a blessing. I have a question for you regarding spiritual warfare. I listened to your spiritual warfare series, which I found to be really good and, for the most part, consistent with my experiences in doing deliverance. And I was curious your thoughts, because when I was kind of in the institutional church, and I came out of Calvary Chapel movement just like you, it was there was like a huge disconnect between the reality of demons, because they claim to believe the Bible literally, and a big part of Jesus's ministry was in deliverance.
Right.
He's constantly casting out demons. But then when I was in the institutional church, I didn't really see a whole lot of that. And myself, I came out of a lot of a very sinful lifestyle, and I knew I had some demonic attachments that I had picked up from that, heavy drug use and all that. And so as I come out, I started looking into those things. And so I guess I have a 2-part question is like, what are your thoughts on the lack of confronting of spiritual warfare happening in the church at large? And also, do you have like resources that you've come across that you found to be trustworthy or bring, good revelation to the subject? Because I know that there's a lot of people suffering out there.
Yeah.
And certainly for the sake of evangelism, people coming out of false religion or whatever it may be,
Sure.
that they're in need of deliverance. And so what is the source of that disconnect, do you think? And then also, like, if you have any resources.
Yeah, I actually have a whole bookshelf full of resources of case studies of, exorcisms and things like that, as well as books written by people who have, as they would call them, deliverance ministries, and books written by people who don't quite believe the same way. Like, for example, you mentioned Calvary Chapel's view. The only teaching I ever received in Calvary Chapel on the subject was under Chuck Smith himself, because I was there when Chuck Smith's church was the only Calvary Chapel on the planet. And I was there from 1970 to 74. And I certainly was familiar with his teaching. And it's one of the first things I disagreed with him on. I actually agreed with him on everything initially because I was 16 when I began to be taught by him. But the first thing I came to disagree with him on was this matter. He did believe, of course, in demon possession. I mean, how could anyone believe in the Bible and not believe in that? But he didn't believe that Christians could have demons. And I just felt, he must be right. And I knew some scriptures that he used, which I later realized didn't address the subject at all. But they were sufficient to have him kind of marginalize the dealing with demons in the church at all, because he didn't believe Christians could have any need for deliverance. Now, later on, I did my own research on that and realized that the scriptural passages that were being used to make that point are certainly not relevant to the subject. I mean, questions about what fellowship has light with darkness, and your body's the temple of the Holy Spirit, and resist the devil and he'll flee from you, and greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world, and all these other scriptures which have absolutely no relevance to the subject of demon possession, and they're not even in the context of that discussion. I began to realize that there are passages in the Scripture that may leave open the possibility of Christians having demons, and I don't know. I can't argue with certainty that Christians can have demons, but there's certainly nothing in the Bible that says they cannot. And I have met people who seem to be Christians and also seem to have demons, and in a few cases have been, in my presence, have been exorcised. So I came to differ from Calvary on that. But, Calvary Chapel, in a sense, reacted very negatively to a popular movement in charismatic circles that was rising to prominence at the time that Calvary Chapel was growing and becoming a movement. And that was the deliverance ministries. And these deliverance ministries often went way out on a limb and were claiming all kinds of things that had no biblical basis. And it was very easy for Chuck Smith to reject a lot of what they said, as well as to hold the view that Christians cannot have demons. And if someone does have a demon, they're not a Christian. Well, since Chuck was a pastor of a church, most of whom were Christians in there, he didn't see much that he would recognize as a demonic manifestation in Christians, or at least that he would call that, because he excluded that already by definition as a problem. So that's probably why Calvary Chapels don't really deal with demon possession very much, although I have seen in some cases some that took it seriously. Let me put you on hold. We'll come back. I have to take a break real quickly, and then we'll come back to your call and discuss this a little more. You're listening to The Narrow Path. I'll be back in about 30 seconds.
As you know, the Narrow Path radio show is Bible radio that has nothing to sell you, but everything to give you. So do the right thing and share what you know with your family and friends. Tell them to tune in to the Narrow Path on this radio station, or go to thenarrowpath.com, where they will find topical audio teachings, blog articles, verse-by-verse teachings, and archives of all the radio shows. You know listener-supported Narrow Path with Steve Gregg. Share what you know.
Welcome back to the Narrow Path radio broadcast. My name is Steve Gregg, and we are live for another half hour, taking your questions and comments about the Bible. If you have questions about the Bible, or you have a disagreement with the host, want to talk about it, feel free to give me a call at this number. It's 844-484-5737. That's 844-484-5737. Now, we were talking before the break with Andrew, and he was talking about demon possession, and he had two questions. One was, do I have any resources, or could I recommend any resources on it? And I have to just say, just go to Amazon.com or ChristianBook.com and put in the subject demon possession, and be careful about secular books on it, because they're sometimes sensationalistic, but there's certainly plenty of sober Christian books written by Christian scholars, by Christian psychiatrists and sociologists and pastors and missionaries especially. One by John Nevius, I think, is very helpful. It's an old book written in the 1800s by a missionary in China, a British medical doctor, Presbyterian, who went to China as a missionary in I think around 1850, if I'm not mistaken. And he didn't believe in demon possession. His training had essentially taught him that doesn't happen anymore. But then he encountered many cases of it, and he did a lot of research, surveyed a lot of other missionaries and their experience, and he wrote a book called Demon Possession. His name is John Nevius, Nevius, a very good older book on the subject, and there's plenty of newer ones too. I won't go into a listing of them because, like I say, I have a whole shelf full of such books. But you also were asking, why is it that perhaps we don't see as much of churches confronting demon possession as we find, say, Jesus doing when he was here. And there's a number of reasons. One of them I was saying is that some churches don't believe that demon possession occurs very often in the context of the church. And many times they're very loath to recognize it. After all, it's much easier to send off somebody who's got a serious life problem, send them off to a psychiatrist and let them worry about it, rather than go through the messy process and very unpleasant and a little spooky sometimes of dealing with an exorcism. But of course, if the person does have a demon, most psychiatrists won't have a clue what to do about it. Some of them don't even believe in the phenomenon, though fortunately there are some who do. There are both secular and religious psychiatrists who know the phenomenon of demon possession, but it's in general, most psychologists or psychiatrists are seculars who don't believe in those supernatural things, so they won't be able to help. They can manage it maybe sometimes. Sometimes if they give strong drugs, they can subdue a person's behavior enough that there's not much the demons can do with somebody who's been sedated. So anyway, I think a lot of pastors would just rather send them off to someone else, and let someone else worry about it. It is unpleasant. I've been involved in a few exorcisms. I'm certainly no expert. Don't claim any expertise about it, but I've seen demons cast out of people before, and it's not a pleasant thing to be a part of. Though it is I have to say, it is kind of exciting to see someone set free so remarkably. Anyway, there are some churches that don't even believe demons exist. Now, these would be more liberal churches that tend to disparage belief in anything supernatural, maybe even God sometimes. But I really think that there's a real discomfort on the part of modern Christians with the subject. I think another factor is that we now have been influenced by a very naturalistic worldview, which is considered to be scientific and modern, although there's nothing scientific about a naturalistic worldview, because you can't do any scientific experiment to discover if a naturalistic worldview is true or not, which makes it absolutely unrelated to science. It's a philosophy. It's a philosophy that eliminates supernatural things by definition, just at the outside, prior to investigation. And so what it is, the naturalistic worldview is simply a prejudice against all things supernatural, but modern, educated people often already have adopted this naturalistic worldview, in which case they have to find some other way of describing things rather than the old-fashioned way of recognizing that somebody's demon-possessed. And so they have these therapeutic names for certain behaviors, and it makes it very difficult to recognize demon possession if you've already decided that such a thing doesn't exist, and that when you do encounter it, you think it's a therapeutic issue that needs to be handled by medical doctors or counselors or something like that, rather than seeing it as a spiritual need for deliverance. Anyway, those are some of the thoughts I would have. And as far as finding resources, I would if I was looking for them, I certainly have a lot of them. I would go online to christianbook.com and put in the subject demon possession. You can't, it wouldn't hurt to get John Nevius's book. It's, again, one of the older classics. He was not a Catholic type of exorcist. In fact, he didn't describe himself as an exorcist at all. He's just a man of science and a medical missionary, and did some very responsible research on the subject. There's another book that John Warwick Montgomery edited. It came out, I suppose, probably in the 70s. It was after there's a symposium in Chicago, where lots of people read papers. Some of them were missionaries, some were pastors, some were medical doctors, some were psychiatrists, some were sociologists, and some were theologians. So you had a whole bunch of different kinds of people, all of them Christian. And they all read papers on various aspects of the subject of demon possession and deliverance. They all believed in it, and their papers are published. John Warwick Montgomery, a man who earned like 8 degrees, a very scholarly man and a Christian, he's the general editor of the book, and the book is published under the name Demon Possession. So both books that I've recommended are called Demon Possession, and there are other books by that name, but two that I would suggest, are very general and helpful would be Demon Possession by John Nevius and Demon Possession edited by John Warwick Montgomery. And we're going to have to move along from that. I hope that's helpful to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And just before I go, I want to point to a couple of scriptures that show clearly that Christians can be demonized. And the word possession, you could go on forever about the word possession, but It's Jesus when the woman came to him asking for deliverance for a child. You know, he said, and it was the Syrophoenician woman. He said, deliverance is the children's bread. You know, he described it as those, like, it's for those that are the children of God. And then the second example is Paul, you know, had a messenger of Satan sent to buffet him. Now, obviously, that demon wasn't possessing Paul, but it was oppressing him. It was bringing trouble to his life, you know,
Yeah.
and that was for a specific sovereign purpose that God had to perhaps keep him humble. But anyway, those are two scriptures to point to, because I know that there's a lot of debate around that, but a lot of people are needlessly suffering. And,
well, I know
it's something
that when I was at
at
Calvary Chapel, they never denied that Christians could be oppressed by devils, by demons, and so they wouldn't have any problem with the reference to Paul. They would just say Christians can't be possessed. I do believe that Matthew 18 and the parable about the unforgiving servant who was delivered over by his master to tormentors until he should pay all that was owed may speak of this subject, because that was a forgiven servant and therefore a Christian. As far as Jesus saying it's not right to take the children's bread and give it to the dogs, I think the word children in that case would be in the context of Jews as opposed to Gentiles. The woman was a Gentile, and Jesus was sent only, he said in that very context, I'm sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So I think he's saying I shouldn't take what is for the Jews at this point and give it to Gentiles.
Right.
But he later would. Anyway, I appreciate your call.
Yeah, God bless you, Steve. Thank you.
Okay, Andrew. Thank you. All right, let's talk to Joe from Honolulu, Hawaii. Welcome.
Aloha, Steve. Thank you for taking my call. Big fan of your show. I have a kind of a more general question about living the Christian life, and that is, I know there are several passages where, Jesus, says that the meek will inherit the earth and things of that nature, but the Bible doesn't seem to really address whether people should embrace sort of a competitive attitude in the workplace. And it seems like on the one hand that you should try to strive to get along with other people, but also if you're trying to be a good representative of God, you should try to do your very best and sort of compete and do your very best in that regard. And I wondered if you had any passages or thoughts on that matter.
Well, that's a difficult one, because we don't really have that phenomenon of modern capitalistic competition in the early church, and exactly how it would be viewed by Christians if they were to apply the principles that they did live under to it is somewhat of a matter of speculation. I would say this, the overriding doctrine of the Christian faith is love your neighbor as you love yourself, and what you'd want someone to do to you, do to them also, and put another's interests at least on the same level as your own, if not above your own. Now, with that principle, we have to ask, okay, suppose I'm in an industry, I have a business in an industry where there's very stiff competition, and we can't all rise to the top, we can't all be wealthy. So, someone's going to probably knock the other guys out or knock them down a few rungs. Should it be me? I can see a number of ways of looking at this. One is, of course, that I don't have a competitive bone in my body, and therefore, if I was in a position, I'd be a very bad CEO in a competitive business, because I don't care that much about money. And I actually think Christians in general shouldn't care as much as they do about money. So my stockholders or whatever, of course, they've invested in order they want to make money for their retirement and things like that. So, I would feel a need to be a diligent businessman, a wise and honest businessman, and to entrust to God my success rather than doing my business with a mind of beating out the competition. It's my opinion that several different companies competing with each other can still make a good living. Levi's makes a good living, and so does Wrangler, and so do several other companies that make blue jeans. Perhaps one has to be on the top, but I don't know that as a Christian, it would be important for me to be on the top. I would be glad if I simply made a living for me and my investors and did them right, and if the other companies did well too. I mean, I certainly don't want somebody else to go without because I somehow made extra. I mean, there is being competitive. I mean, the term itself suggests that you're doing your business with a mind to beat out other people and to rise above them. Now, one might say, but that's what my investors, that's what they hire me to do, is to beat out the other competition. Well, I'd have trouble satisfying the investors. I would say, listen, I'm going to do everything I can to make this company succeed, and I'm gonna serve and fear God, and I'm not going to try to hurt other people or competitors, but I'm going to do my best to advertise our products and promote them and make a product that people will want to buy more of. And if my competitors do worse than we do, and they fail, well, that's on them, not on me. I'm going to be the best I can. I'm not being on the best I can in order to beat out other people. I'm being the best I can in order to glorify God and to serve our public, serve our customers well. And if someone else does it as well or better, well, I mean, so we'll do the best we can and leave the results with God. I can put it in terms of Christian radio programs because that's the closest thing to a business I've been involved with, though it's not a business. We don't have any overhead. We don't have any salaries. We don't have anything. We just have it's just me and a microphone. People send in money, I turn around. We send that money to radio stations to buy time. I don't take any of it. But if you listen to our program, you know that we don't advertise. We don't advertise products. We don't sell anything at our website or on the air, and we don't hardly even mention that we, except maybe at the end of the first half hour, and then at the end of the hour, we mention we're listener supported, and that's about it. Now, I received a letter some years ago from a man who had a program on one of the same stations that we're on, and he says I've been on the air on radio for 60 years, and he says the hardest thing is to get people to give and to support. He says I don't know how you stay on the air because you don't sell anything, you don't have, because this guy was selling things all the time. He says you don't hardly mention it, and I just thought, well, I don't know. Maybe all I'm doing, I'm not trying to make money. I'm not trying to expand the radio program to other stations. We're on 20-something stations, but it's taken us 20-something years to get that far, and I haven't really pushed for more, or even never pushed to get that far. I'm just trying to provide a service to the body of Christ. I'm here to, if people want to ask questions and don't know who to ask, I'll try to give them an answer. If they don't like my answer, they can go to someone else and listen to them. That's okay. I'm not competing with other radio stations. I'm not competing for their dollars. I'm not competing for anything. I'm just, as a Christian, and it'd be the same if I had a business. As a Christian, I just want to make sure that when I stand before God, he says, you did the best that I could have expected you to do. You were honest. You didn't cheat. You didn't compromise. And I mean, those are the things that a businessman is going to have to answer to God for too. Did you compromise, and did you lie in your advertising? Did you cut corners in your product quality? If so, I don't think you're a very good Christian, But if you, frankly, if you don't compromise, I think you'll find that God himself honors and supports your business. You might not be at the top. I'm certainly not. I mean, this radio show is certainly not at the top. There's programs that are on 10 times as many stations or 100 times as many, I think. But that's okay. I'm not interested in being at the top of any particular list. I'm just doing what I was made to do, and I don't care what God does with it, except I hope he does something good. And I think that'd be the attitude I think a person ought to have in business too. Jesus was a businessman for the first 30 years of his life. How did he do business? I don't know if he's trying to drive all the other carpenters in town out of work. I doubt it. I imagine he was just tried to do the best he could for his customers. and I wouldn't be surprised if he made a good living at it. But I don't, in a competitive world, I don't think Christians should have this desire to succeed at the expense of anyone. I think that business in the Christian's ethic should be, I provide a service or a product at a fair price to people who need it or want it. And if others do the same thing, good on them. I don't have to be the richest man in town.
No, that's very helpful.
And if my stockholders don't like it, they can fire me.
Right. No, that's very helpful. I think that certainly helps sort out of a lot of ideas. I think the only other conflict I had is that I know that, for a man, aren't there passages where the Lord calls on us to be good providers for our families and to sort of avoid embracing effeminate lifestyles and things like that? And that's sort of,
Well, I don't think that by caring for other people, I don't think it's effeminate. I don't think it's effeminate to be compassionate toward competitors, because they're human beings too. Their needs are the same as yours. Their families have needs too.
Right.
And as far as providing well for your family, there's a standard of what people need given in Scripture. Paul said it in 1 Timothy chapter 6, having food and clothing, we will with these things be content. I raised 5 children. We were pretty poor, but we never lacked food, clothing, housing, or even a car to drive in. We didn't have much else a lot of the time, and my kids never suffered for it. So, we never lacked anything. But to say, well, but God wants you to make your family rich, I think not. I think that's one of the hardest, I think it's one of the most damaging things a person can do for their children is to make them rich. I mean, children who without working end up being wealthy, grow up feeling very entitled. When Jesus looked at the rich young ruler, it says in Mark chapter 10, he looked on him and he loved him. And he said, listen, sell everything you have and give it to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. Now, that's what Jesus says to someone that he loves. We love our children, and we think that we should therefore leave them rich. Jesus said, listen, I love you. Sell what you have and follow me and give to the poor. Lay up treasures in heaven, not on earth. And, so, I mean, Jesus' values are different than ours. See, of course, anyone who doesn't provide for his family has denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. But provided what for his family? Of course, in America, it's, you can hardly get housing. That isn't super expensive, but you can certainly choose a modest way of living. Or if you don't, if God provides for you and you're very wealthy because you're just being an honest businessman, then you can live however you feel your conscience before God will let you live. I'm not telling people they have to live poor. I had to live poor for many decades because that's all I had was only a little bit of money, and I wouldn't compromise my values. One of those is I'll never tell anyone what I need. And since I wouldn't compromise, a lot of times I didn't have much, but I always had enough. And so anyway, I've never been able to understand what makes a person want to give his children wealth when wealth easily come by is the enemy of good character. I'm not saying that people can't have good character, even though they inherit wealth, but it's the enemy. Jesus said it's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. And I don't think Jesus was just talking to hear the sound of his own voice. I think he's telling the truth.
No, I mean, I would definitely agree with everything you said. I think something that I struggle with is I just have an extremely competitive spirit, and I'm not sure how best to channel it. I don't feel like God gave me that spirit to, I don't know, sort of try to annihilate what I'm feeling inside, but maybe if I just focus on channel it into just doing as good of a job as I can, then that would be the most constructive way to deal with that.
Lots of people are very competitive by nature, and if that competitiveness leads you to want to trample on somebody else on your way to the top, then it's a sinful urge you need to mortify. If it simply makes you want to make sure that you do the best you can for God and leave the results with Him, well, then that can be a good thing. Listen, we've talked a long time, and I've got lots of people waiting. I don't have time for one more call, but I'm going to have to move along.
Thank you.
Okay, Joe, thanks for your call. Let's see here. Who's been waiting the longest here? It's been Rena from Los Angeles. Rena, welcome to The Narrow Path. Thanks for calling.
Hi, thanks so much for taking my call. Just wanted to make, and I really appreciate your knowledge, your biblical knowledge. I find it very refreshing. So thank you so much for your diligence to the Lord.
Thank you.
So it's in regards to the schools, I think what most people don't realize is that our founding fathers, when they set up our school system, they actually said if the Bible ever gets taken out of schools, the schools are to resort back, they're to be given back to the church. And obviously, we're a far cry from that, but that is literally what our founding fathers wanted to happen, because they obviously really understood the biblical value of education. Like, it says, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. So that is something that I don't see that is something that we need to take very seriously into not only consideration, but we really need to say, hey, you know what? We're responsible. We shouldn't be just hiding out in our little, home school churches, away from the world. We're to evangelize, and I think we've really missed the mark in regards to staying in public school and not allowing them to change us, but standing for our values and fighting that good fight of faith.
Well, I appreciate your thoughts. I just say this. First of all, I don't think the founding fathers believed in public schools. Most of them were educated at home or in private institutions. And the idea of, the public being taxed to send people to school that are run by the government, that came along, I think, only, 100 or so years ago. I don't know exactly how long ago because I'm not a student of that. But I don't think that public schooling was one of the things that the founders dreamed of having. It is true they believed that any education that didn't include the Bible would be corrupt ultimately, or would lead to corruption in society. They did believe that the influence of religion and of the Bible was very important to the well-being of a free people. And I think that our modern society and the turn it's taken in the last 30 years has given a very clear support and endorsement of their view about that, because as our society has turned away from the Bible, our society is falling apart. And I don't think it's coincidental. Now, I'm not sure how you meant that we've dropped the ball with homeschooling. I don't think homeschooling is a bad idea. I think many of our founding fathers we know were homeschooled, and but the idea that we have to keep our kids in public school because we have to evangelize them, I don't think that God ever ordained children as evangelists. Children are generally at that stage of life where they are having their thoughts formed. They're not there to teach their teachers. They're there to be taught by their teachers. And if their teachers are teaching bad stuff, well, the parents can try to teach the opposite at home, and that's, maybe they'll be successful. Some Christian parents are able to do that. Some are not. In some cases, the teachers, because they get the kids 6 hours a day, and the parents only get to talk to them, an hour a day, if that, It seems like the public school ends up having more influence over the children than the parents. Now, I believe that parents can get involved with the school board and things like that, but I think it's very important to note that children that you put into public school are probably, in most cases, not going to be evangelists there, even if they're Christian. They're going to be hammered, and more, it's going to be illegal for your children to speak up or even to practice their faith in public schools. So I'm not one of those to say, send your kids to public school so they can convert the school. I don't think kids can do that. I think parents have a hard enough time doing that. I think we should be trying, but I don't think our kids should be doing it. You're listening to the Narrow Path radio broadcast. We are listener supported. If you'd like to help us out, you can go to our website, thenarrowpath.com, and see just how to do that. thenarrowpath.com. Thanks for joining us. Let's talk again soon.